I want to give you some time to work today, but we fall behind on our lectures, and I want to call attention to three lectures we have coming up. So we're going to work on that. And one is the lectures are all focused on working with the elements of design or the principles of design. So you start to have examples that will fuel you in your creativity. And one of the lectures that we didn't get to yet, but we will today, is very simply how shape, and it's really appropriate for what we're talking about for real to abstract, how just taking shapes and focusing on specific shapes creates a composition and carries your eye through page. And if you look at Matisse, who focused very much on working with flat areas of color and shape, how just these shapes and their relationship to one another defines figures and creates a beautiful composition. And also notice that this, this seated nude, which is what this is, this Matisse, again, was pieces of paper overlapping each other, and they were cutouts. Matisse did a lot of cutout work. And notice how he fills the frame. He has a rectangular sheet of paper, and essentially the figure is leaning against the wall of the edges of the paper itself. And you get this feeling of being contained, right? You can feel, the head's laying down. You can get that feeling of being contained. And notice it's just one color. It's just essentially the positive negative space. The positive space being the blue cutouts and the negative space being the background. And I'm always amazed at how exciting shapes can be. And one of the things I featured on here is the fact that you can take a sphere, or in this case, it's now a two-dimensional design because it's a photograph and it's been flattened out to be circles, right? Kind of like that Olay ad with the stacked graphics we talked about earlier. But I was in Barcelona on a weekend, and there was a festival in a neighborhood called Gracia. Has anybody ever been there? To Barcelona or that neighborhood? Yeah. Well, in August, when everybody vacations in the city, everybody leaves, this neighborhood holds a festival. And it's a small neighborhood, and each street of this neighborhood, all the neighbors get together and they have a theme for the entire neighborhood. And they have a competition who can decorate their street most effectively based on the theme for that summer's competition. And this year it happened to be on outer space, like extraterrestrial, other worlds. And it was extraordinary to find, obviously they don't really have a budget for it, so everything was very handmade. And they took styrofoam balls, which I think are particularly unattractive. I don't know about you. But they took styrofoam balls and they carved them out and they filled them with like Christmas lights, and they hung them from their balconies and their rooftops. And it's all weekend long. It's morning, noon, and night, and it goes for 2 days or 2.5 days. And they created this other world of planets along the entire street. It was spectacular. And that was all through shape, the spheres, and carving these lines into those spheres and illuminating them. So we have all these interesting things around us that we can create artwork with and create a whole different mood and environment. So when you start to consider shapes, consider what you're communicating based on the type of shape that you have, whether it's a closed shape, essentially like this rectangle that encloses the shape of the female figure, or whether it's a representational shape like this bird in this silk screening, or a non-objective shape, something abstract, or whether you're using curvilinear lines, curvy lines, organic kind of lines, or you're using something rigid and geometric. When you think of, for example, that line and dot story, that video we saw, when he was rigid compared to being squiggly, how when we did the scribbler drawings, how the lines were really difficult to make rigid, and how organic and how much movement you got out of the scribbler and the randomness of the lines. So shapes are the same thing. If you look at this type right here, the word Bolivar, notice it's made up of really just circles and rectangles and overlapping shapes. So it's very powerful. And as a graphic artist, you can often simplify things down to represent something far deeper or more exciting than looking at the predictable. We could easily use Times Roman to type the word Bolivar, but it certainly wouldn't have as much pop or fun as this does right here. And same thing, don't ever don't ever underestimate the power of shape and overlapping shapes in this beautiful silkscreen here, which behind it has a Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer sits behind it, and there's transparent shapes on top of it, which enhance the message. And the Serenity Prayer itself also enhances the graphic of the composition and almost looks like a texture, because the first thing I notice is the shapes. They feel like they're in the foreground on top of it. And then I step deeper into it and look at the texture background and realize it's the Serenity Prayer. And again, when it comes to type doesn't always have to be typeset. Handwritten type often looks far more engaging than something that's digitally created. One of the things here, you might decide that you want to create a message about something missing. Do you always have to say that there's something missing? Can you represent it like this graphic down here in the big red rectangle? Just by taking out that shape that we all associate with a puzzle piece, obviously we draw the analogy together as we're not a complete whole, or there's something missing, right? The metaphor kind of smacks you in the head. So this, always, again, back to the beginning of the class, what's your message and what do you have to say? And how can you say it in an engaging way that's not just using words, that you can visually represent it? And then I found this really thrilling personally. There's an artist right here named Chris Natrop, and this artist does these incredible paper cutouts and creates amazing sculptures and environments. And there's a link to the website right here. And just through, there's incredible volumes of work in here. Look at this, through all these years. I probably found this artist this year, which was lots of white on white. And if you look through their artwork, which you can do on your own, they started by just illuminating it in a specific way. And it's almost like the negative space or the cast shadow becomes as important as the positive graphic of the work itself. And they created room environments by using filtered light, which cast shadows on the wall, which I find incredibly dramatic. I mean, you've created a transformational environment. I mean, it's like a world unto itself. And this, again, is two-dimensional. It's paper, but because it's suspended in a three-dimensional way, you've created a complete environment with it. I find it incredibly exciting. So I'm going to leave that to you to look at on your own. And come back here to, I'm back on let's close that. Let's come back here. Let's go back one. I have to go back a few. There we go. So consider shape very carefully when you start to create your designs, and particularly for this project that we're working on now. And let's move on to color. Any questions about shape? No? Comments? All right. The color is interesting. And I don't talk a lot about traditional color. Has anybody in this class had color theory from elementary school? Color wheels, complementary colors? Anybody not know what I'm talking about? No? Okay. All right. Well, there's a few things that I consider important about color in here besides Kuhler, which you all know about now. But again, if you look at this painting, this beautiful painting, um, just through subtle colors and keeping a pretty limited palette, there's an incredible sense of illumination because of the bright whites against and the shapes creating this room and this space. And then the warmth of the sunlight comes through just based on the color palette here, which I think is really strong and wonderful. One of the things I do want you to see is a video on color systems, because we focus a lot on what we view on our monitor displays as color and what we view on paper. So let's just take a minute for this here.
Hello, this is my number.
Oh, forget this. We got to stop this one.
It's not going to be about Photoshop.
I forgot. There was something really wonderful in here, and I realized I got to pull this guy. He's going to put you to sleep. I don't even want you to start to fall asleep. I forgot. Yeah, I gotta send myself an email to pull that and swap it. I thought I had. He goes on forever.
You'll want to pause the video when you.
Okay. One of the things we refer to when we talk about color is the difference of realistic color, which is often referred to as local color. Like I've got a black jacket with a turquoise lining and blonde hair. But you might decide to represent me like an Andy Warhol painting, and I might have purple hair and green skin and a white jacket with an orange lining. And that would be abstract color. It would be not realistic color necessarily. And how you can take the same drawing, just like in that real to abstract we were seeing that Bobby was doing with hers, by changing the colors, you can change the mood or the impact of the message. And here's an example of Monet paintings, who is an Impressionist painter, who studied the same scene, which is the House of Parliament, and noticed that different atmospheric elements create a completely different color palette and a different mood for exactly the same subject. So when you work with color, it has a lot of power to communicate a lot of things. And that would be considered local color, be realistic. But obviously different times of day and different environments are going to create a whole different mood for you. Now, color also has a lot of power for symbolism. I mean, if we were thinking of Coca-Cola, what color would you think of? Red, exactly. And if you're thinking of Bank of America, what color would you think of? Red and blue, right, Americana colors. And if you think of the flag for Sweden, what color would it be? Blue, right? Yellow and blue? Yellow and blue, right. And how many of you know what that blue box is on the upper right corner of the screen? Raise your hand. Really high. This is usually a where do you live kind of thing. This is interesting. Maddie, do you know what that is? No. Where were you born? In Sussex, okay. Yeah, so that blue box, if you're American, I think if you were born in the United States, that blue box is a Tiffany's box. Is there anybody who's never heard of Tiffany's in here? Maddie, have you heard of Tiffany's? Yeah, but you don't recognize the box. Okay, so that box has been branded. So if you're in the United States and you've seen advertising, you know that if you get a blue box with a white bow like that, you're going to be really happy. Yes, you are. Okay. Because Tiffany's is very high-end jewelry, and it's all the very elegant high-end jewelry and crystal and silver and very opulent items. What's that? It's Audrey Hepburn having breakfast, exactly. Anyway, so that turquoise box is associated with Tiffany's, just like the red was associated with Coca-Cola, or the blue and yellow associated with the flag of Sweden. Color has a lot of impact and mood. If you're thinking of somebody who's angry, what color is that person going to be?
Red and black.
Red, black, orange, fiery colors, right? If you're thinking of somebody who's serene, what color might that person be? What's that? Blue, soft blues, soft blues. If you're thinking of somebody who is an outdoorsy kind of person, what color palette? If you're creating a product that was for an outdoorsy product, what color palette would you probably choose? Brown, green, like your bear digital painting. We got that same message of being outdoorsy, right? So obviously, color has a lot of power in how we associate the colors. Now, when we talk about color, we use different terminology. When we talk about the color itself, we refer to the hue. When we talk about the lightness or the darkness of the color, the tint of the color, the brightness of the color, we're talking about its value. So if we look at the sky in this Getty ad, we can see that there is a blue sky, and the sky goes to light blue. So there's different values of blue in that sky. If we talk about the intensity of a color, the saturation is what we call it. The intensity, the richness, the chroma, which is another word for color. When we talk about a hue, a color, at its highest intensity, it is purely saturated. It is most saturated. Just think of a cup of espresso, and if you keep adding water to that cup of espresso, you're desaturating it, right? Till it becomes like dirty water, right? We wouldn't want to be drinking that. Okay. Now, this is kind of fun. We'll look at branding since we have some Tiffany people and non-Tiffany people here. Let's focus. Let me pause this. There you go. So obviously colors, we have lots of associations with it. Actually, I was thinking when I saw the thing about purple and Prince, isn't Prince now just a symbol? He's no longer a name. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, am I right?
And it's like the symbol and the artist formerly known as.
That's it, right. Do you guys know, is Prince well known in Sweden? Yeah? Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about color theory so you understand what happens not only when you work with hues. That's right. Let me skip down to color theory here, which is great. Let me start with this video. Now I gotta pause it. Why I like that video is I like the fact that they tell you all the terminology. Not that you necessarily need to know it, but I think it helps you understand color theory. The other thing is I like when you get to see them take one logo and apply the color theory to it and see how you can vary it. So even with your real to abstract or with any work, you might want to apply it. I'm not sure how far in the future. We're going to have one assignment where we're going to do the identical, an exact duplication of one image, and you're going to change it using two completely different color palettes and see how it impacts it. So this is a good lecture to rely on when you do that. If you look to the left here, you'll see how you can take orange and you can take blue, which are complementary colors. And when you take these opposing hues, you notice that as you blend them, they start to neutralize one another, and you can create incredibly different colors as a result to mixing complementary colors. So often when I'm designing a logo, for example, and I want a lot of contrast and I want to have a lot of variety in tonality, I'll often pick complementary colors when I do my design work because I think you get a lot more mileage out of the designs that you do with two colors. Another thing I want to talk about just regarding color is the difference between what's called additive color and subtractive color. And additive color is what your video display is. So if you took a loop or a magnifier up to your video display, you would see that there is 100% saturation of blue and green and red, RGB, sorry I said it out of order, RGB, red, green, blue, for additive color. The more you add color to it, the more you're adding light and therefore white. So if you looked at the white, you would see full RGB color showing up when you're looking at your screen. If you are painting or drawing or doing something not on a RGB display, that would be called subtractive color, Because as you add more color, as you add more paint, you're taking away the light. So it's like if you pour the blue on top of the red, on top of the purple, you're going to get a muddy, murky, black, brown color, right? Which is subtractive color. You're taking away the light. And just knowing those two color theories, I think, is useful, particularly when you're considering how you're building your files and so forth. We haven't focused on that very much, and we really don't use this class to focus on the difference between a video display, RGB, and something that's printed, which would be subtractive color. But knowing the terminology is important. The other thing is when your files are printed, and they're traditionally printed at a print shop, you can see on the right this little diagram right here, lithographic printing, which is what offset printing is. You're really printing full color by using 4 colors. And it's not the mixing of the colors, you know, where the inks mix literally. It's the illusion of dots sitting next to each other and varying size of the dots, and whether there's a blue or a black next to a yellow or a magenta, they sit at an angle to one another. They never overlap. They make what's called a rosette. And it's the illusion of these dots next to each other that creates the illusion of full color graphics. And that's actually called a halftone, what you're looking at. And it's called a halftone because they break full color, continuous tone, into dots. And it's those dots that print to create the illusion of color. So if you had an orange flower, you would probably be, and you were printing it in process color, you would be printing it probably using just the magenta and just the yellow, and probably not the cyan and not the black. And the cyan is that turquoise blue color there. Is that clear for everybody? Kind of interesting. If you ever want to look through a magnifier or a loop, I'd be happy to show you. Okay, and that's so much for colors. Anybody want to add anything about color? No, you're all real patient. I just want to make sure we get these lectures in so you can consider the tools that we have at our fingertips here when we design things. Now you talk about saturation of color, and you look at that page in the upper left corner here, doesn't it look like that is complete saturated pigment on a page, right? So this lecture isn't really about color. This lecture is really about texture and pattern. Because one of the things I think is most powerful when we design something two-dimensionally, like on a digital monitor or on the paper that we print and post on the wall, I think what creates a really rich graphic is adding a sense of texture to it, a tactile quality. And even on a monitor display where there's no touch involved, right? We can't feel the paper, we can't feel the texture. It doesn't mean that we can't create the illusion of that texture and create kind of a tactile quality. You know, if you were talking about creating, I mean, for example, let's just take the paint right up above. We've created through darks and lights a sense of something being saturated. Now you can do that by painting on paper and then scanning it, which would capture that thickness of paint or pastel. Or you could go into Photoshop, for example, and you could color something, and you could go into a filter where you could choose to emboss slightly or add a drop shadow slightly to some shape that you have, which creates kind of a depth and creates the illusion of texture. So there's lots of ways to do it. There's the real way where you physically do the art and then you scan it. Or you can create the illusion of it digitally by the tools that are available, for example, in Photoshop or in Illustrator. And you're going to have an assignment where you're going to do both, where you're going to do in the future, I think it might be the next assignment after this, where you work with texture literally yourselves, and where you learn to take something digital and work in Photoshop and manipulate using the filters to create a sense of texture. So you know different ways and to create these tools and effects. Now, one of the things I often do when I'm printing something, and I know I'm printing it on uncoated paper, is I'll often scan paper that I like, and I'll make a library of papers. So I can use it as backgrounds to create a tactile quality. Because imagine if I took this page and I took that paper with the flower petals in it, and I used the entire scan as a background to my web page. You'd have the illusion that the web page was created or printed on a surface of paper, which is really wonderful. Now, and like I said, in the future, you're going to have an assignment where you're going to start to develop your own texture library, which is essentially, if you read what I'm going to highlight right here, this graphic, which is essentially what this artist did. They decided to build a complete swatch library of textures for themselves. So when they wanted to create artwork, they had this huge library of high-resolution textures. And I don't want to focus too much on that because I know I'm going to come back to this when we introduce the assignment. But I do want to focus on the fact that often when we use patterns or textures, we're creating a mood. And we're creating a rhythm when we look at something by pattern. And when I have a very visceral reaction to this photograph here, and I'm curious if for any of you that pattern creates a mood or a feeling, like what you sense when you look at the black and white photograph at the top. Trevor, do you have a thought? Is it, yeah.
Sure.
Trent, do you have a thought? Thank you. What's that?
That's an outline.
No, I'm asking you.
Oh,
This,
gotcha.
do you have a thought about this?
Which one?
The black and white one in the upper right corner. So does it create, like, can you visualize yourself there, like what it feels like to be?
It's kind of like a dark mood almost, just because like the object is black, and then like the lines are kind of create like a weird sense of, I don't know, like, it just brings a dark mood to that kind of.
Brings a dark mood?
Yeah.
Yeah, describe it more.
Just 'cause, like the shadows and everything, like all like the black, like the outline, you don't really have you don't have a texture of what it actually is, except like the lines give the page a texture, like the actual tree, I think it is, right?
Uh-huh,
Or
sure.
plant or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Really smooth and like you don't have any detail on it because it's just like an outline.
Uh-huh.
But, like when you have like all the lines there, it kind of gives it a texture.
Uh-huh, gives it texture. What does the day feel like to you? The weather,
Like late in the day.
late in the day. Why do you feel that?
Just because it's like a silhouette. It's not really.
Okay,
defined.
so harsh shadow.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Maddie, you got a thought?
Yeah, it makes me feel uneasy, I think, because if it was in colour,
Mm-hmm.
it would probably be really golden and warm
Uh-huh.
because of the sun, but it's not, it's in black and white. And
Right,
I don't know, it's like someone covered the sun up and
right.
I don't like it.
So you're uncomfortable. Yeah, and Trent said that he had a dark feeling about it, which is what he said from the onset. So here you've got a sense of rhythm, right? Because you've got these lines that repeat themselves, but you've also got a sense of you believe it's sunny because we're looking at a shadow and not at the tree itself. So you can feel the heat of the day, but then you feel kind of eerie about it because it's in black and white. It doesn't feel realistic to you. So it's created a mood. It's created a contrast for you. So there's also ways to look at pattern just all around us. It's everywhere, like in the chain link fence, obviously. And if you were to, so let me come back to this. Yeah, let me come back to this one. So when I look at the one with the stripes here, or I even look at the chain link fence, does anybody have any different associations with those when you look at them, when you look at the patterns? Yeah,
Well, it
Olivia.
just looks like they're trapped, kind of, like
Oh,
the bars.
uh-huh.
Or maybe kind of like a jail or something.
Oh, yeah.
Trapped in.
Yeah, that trunk is certainly trapped, isn't it? Yeah. So you feel trapped because they look like bars, right? And if you were to walk in front of that wall that has the stripes, the black and white one, does it create an association for anybody? For me, I have an association of being a kid and running a stick along the wall like that. Can anybody think of doing something like that, running a stick along a wall? And what sound would you hear? Andreas, what would you hear? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So tell me if this is an American thing or if this is an international thing. When you were a kid, did you have bicycle? Do you have bicycle?
Yeah.
We used to, as a kid, so I'm 100 years old, we used to take something called a clothespin. You probably don't even know what that is. But we used to take a clothespin and playing cards and put them in the spokes of our bike and ride our bike, and it would make the same sound you just made, tick, 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 right? So when I look at something like that wall with the ridges, I actually don't get an uneasy feel. I don't get creeped out by it. I get the tick, 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 tick. I can picture just walking along, just going blump, 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 right? And you can feel the rhythm. And kind of the same thing with a chain link fence. It's like I can feel myself running my hand on it and going bumpity, bumpity, bump with it. Or the same thing with the playing cards in your bike. It creates a certain rhythm. So you can create the illusion of a noise or sound based on how you work with patterns or repetitive graphics. Kind of like, I forgot who did the music and the waves and the notes in the background of their digital painting. Who was that? Oh, that was Mullen. Okay. So like Mullen did with the sound waves, she created a rhythm. She created flowy waves, but it was a repetitive line that flowed. So we heard music when that's the association we had when we saw it. So that, again, that's a pattern. It's repeating something. And then, of course, there's patterns in nature that go from small to big, and patterns in nature that go from curvy to sharp. So we could feel this succulent, the prickles on it, just by how each of those shapes repeats itself and ends if we ran our hand on top of that. So there's like a tactile quality. There's also a sound quality that comes out of working with textures and patterns that I always want you to keep in mind that might enhance your work. And as you'll see in examples in the future, you'll see different ways that you can use that to enhance your work. So any thoughts about any of that? Nope. Interesting? Okay, then where I want to go from here mostly is just to give you the rest of the class time as lab time, because we have a lot of it. And John and I are available to help you with your reel to abstract if you need help with executing it or ways to hone in on it. And don't forget that we have scanners in the class to help you move forward in capturing your progress. Are there any questions that would come up about how to do any of that? No? Okay. Then let me stop the video, which is